I like big concepts, and I cannot lie. Other bass players, well, they might deny. But I'm not going to deny that looking at bigger concepts like we did in previous videos helps us to come to new understandings in what we are creating. When we zoom out a little bit from what we're trying to do, we can find new ways to create new things. And so let me share with you 5 bass line shapes that will help you improve your walking bass lines. Welcome to Learn Jazz Bass with Matt Rybicki. If you're interested in finding out more about how to play jazz bass, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, check below for a link for a partial PDF related to the lines that we're talking about today. I also wanted to mention at the end of this video, I'm doing something a little different. I've not tried this before and I'm not sure how helpful it will be, but it occurred to me that you might benefit from having an actual play along track in the recording of this video. So at the end, I've got a few of the songs that we're going over samples of, and in the play-alongs, there's simple bass and drum play-alongs, and there's 10 choruses. So it just gives you an opportunity to play along in case you don't have the recording or the ability to get that for yourself. So let me know in the comments if you think this is helpful, if you would. So when I say bass line shapes, I'm talking about the visual representation of the notes on the page, not the actual pitches, just what does it look like when you look at one note following another. So there's 5 different kinds of shapes I wanted to talk about. The first is ascending linear lines, so straight lines going up. Then descending lines, straight lines going down. Next, I want to talk about what we'll call landscape lines. Then I want to talk about angular lines. And lastly, call and response, or maybe 2-tiered lines. And we'll look at these all a little more right now, one at a time. So as we go into talking about these shapes, one thing I wanted to note is that these examples are not up to speed for most of the recording examples that I used. In other words, I didn't use the original recording, but rather a play along to show a sample of the bass line. And they are not necessarily the same tempo nor exactly the same feel as these recordings. So I would highly encourage you to check out the original recording. That said, the idea is to try to study them and hopefully play them as well. So I tried to make it more accessible for all of us. So the first shape that I want to talk about today are linear ascending lines. And I have the word line in there twice, don't I? Well, what I'm trying to get across quickly is that it's basically a straight line that continues in a line and doesn't sort of change directions. And when we look at the practical application of this, it often makes sense that you have to sort of backtrack slightly. But when you look at the overall sort of image of the notes one after the next in a group of 4, 6 measures or so on, you'll see a straight line like I've got here below me on the screen. So this is a simple idea, fun to do, to try to continue a line going up while the chords change. It can be tricky. So the first, I've got a sample line that I created that hopefully will give you sort of a more dramatic idea of what the concept is. And then I've got a couple samples from some masters. The first is Paul Chambers on Blues by 5, and the next Scott LaFaro on Witchcraft. And again, these are just little excerpts from their improvised lines. I found some legitimate places where this general idea happened, but you notice it's not strictly every single note is a higher pitch than the one that came before. It stops here and there and goes back here and there. That's fine. I'm just sort of introducing the general concept. When we think about creating lines or analyzing lines, we see sort of a broad view of a straight line going up. So let's take a listen now to these examples that I provided. right, so the next shape we're going to talk about is the descending line and descending straight line, essentially. And this is just the inverse of what we talked about just now, starting high and going low. And it takes a very clever and quick thinking mind to be able to continue a line that descends as the chords change, just like I talked about with the ascending line. And again, my sample here is just to illustrate the point as sort of dramatically as I can, but we have some real world examples here. We've got Ron Carter on There Is No Greater Love, who ironically, I didn't realize this when I found Ron Carter's recording of this. I didn't realize that he did something that I essentially did in the sample that I created too, which was pretty neat. But he did it better than me, of course. And then Doug Watkins on Blue 7 has a descending line too. So let's take a listen to these three examples of descending linear bass lines. And next are angular bass lines. And what I mean by that is that you'll find a series of notes. It doesn't have to be every note, but that there are large leaps in between one note and another. You'll see in the image that I've got on the screen here, these arrows go really straight, almost, straight up and down. You're really making large jumps. And my sample bass line here that I've included also, again, is very dramatic, is not super musical at all. Please don't take this as being the most musical bass line at all. I'm just trying to illustrate the point, like this is the idea I'm talking about. And we'll find examples here and there of great master players doing that. I found that Ron Carter uses this kind of technique very often, and we've got a little excerpt of him on E.S.P. And then also Wilbur Ware on Strivers Row plays some really sort of basic conceptual things, but they do jump around quite a lot. He's using octaves basically to make those jumps. But the idea is you have very sharp up and down movement rather than a straight line. So let's take a listen to these examples that I've included. Next are landscape lines. And what I mean by this is if you were to draw a line, as I've show in the illustration here on the screen, draw a line between the notes, you sort of see gently rolling hills, sort of the outline of hills in the distance, right? It sort of goes up and down and then up sort of far and then down a little bit and then down further and so on and so forth. So it's kind of got the landscape of the land, so to speak. And this is a very standard thing for lots and lots of bass players to do, but I think it provides some insight when we think about our lines in varying the direction in a musical way. So let's take a listen to my sample line, and then we've got Doug Watkins again and Israel Crosby on Broadway. next are what I call call and response lines. And again, my example sample isn't the most musical thing in the world, and you won't hear a ton of players doing something like this, especially sort of this repeated thing over and over again. Once again, it's just to illustrate the point of sort of making a musical statement in some specified amount of time, and then your line actually answers that musical statement, or it somehow reflects it, is somehow poetically rhyming in a sense with the first idea that you had. So in my extreme example here, I've got sort of one phrase for one measure and then it jumps way down for one measure. Those big jumps don't have to happen. And in fact, this isn't so much a visual idea, it's rather more conceptual. This is about the note choices. What are the pitches? What is the little melody you're creating? And how do you answer that melody? So if you were to think about it visually, it could sort of often be like the angular thing we talked about, where it's just in a bigger scope. So we've got one measure that's up here, and then another measure that's down here, and then another measure that's up, and another measure, it's dramatically down. It doesn't have to be that, sort of demonstrated by the examples that I chose, but not for me. The amazing and unbelievable Israel Crosby performance from the Ahmad Jamal Trio. I've got 3 examples from there, because to me, he is the master of this idea as far as taking a musical thought and continuing it, or answering it, or completing it, depending on how you think of it. I want to do a separate video about But Not For Me in its entirety another time. But for now, we've got Israel doing this sort of call and response as far as really answering melodies. And my example, just an extreme example to illustrate the concept. Let's take a listen. Lastly, I've got Ron Carter on Blues 7. And the reason I say this is sort of a bonus line is that it sort of crosses a bunch of the different concepts we were talking about. It's got angular things, it's got question and answers, it's got some linear things, it's got sort of landscape, of course, but it just kind of covers a bunch of things. It doesn't fit into one of these sort of labels, but it's such a cool line that I wanted to include it. And maybe you have your own perspective about how you might label what Ron is doing here. It's very specific. This is really a standard blues, blues 7, as you probably know, and he's implying a whole bunch of different harmony here. So let's take a quick listen to Ron Carter on Blues 7. So we are at the end of our demonstrations for today. And remember, after we say goodbye, I've got some play-alongs that continue on after the so-called credits here. I hope that this was helpful for you, as always, and please be sure to like and subscribe. Look for that partial PDF link below. And always remember, straight ahead and strive for tone.